The future is a constant companion of our lives. Every activity that we perform in the present builds on an experienced past and is directed toward the future. For example, as we cook, we may rely on recipes that have worked well in the past, and we may dedicate the meal to an upcoming dinner. In this sense, organization scholars have long conceptualized the future plainly as the period that lies ahead. According to this conceptualization, the future is the chronological successor of the present, which is preceded by the past. This chronological understanding of the future also seems to be common sense. For example, as Angela Merkel explained, everything that has not happened yet is the future, if it isn't happening now. In Luhmann's words, such an understanding of the future implies that the future cannot begin. It is constantly pushed forward by a fleeting present that leaves the past behind and constantly moves forward. However, as we can observe, actors and organizations do attempt to get a hold of the future in the present. For example, by performing planning practices, they set goals based on the future that they envision. In fact, in spite of repeated criticism, studies have found that planning practices continue to be a widespread part of organizations. Importantly, planning practices and other practices for engaging with the future are not neutral. The production of imaginations of the yet to come serves as a title for action that legitimizes or delegitimizes activities performed in the present. For example, when profitable investments are contested in terms of their doubtful implications for sustainable development, actors may refer to established plans and how important it is to achieve them in the future. This has two notable implications. First, somewhat paradoxically, the future is a category of the present. By referring to the future as a title for action in the present, they contribute to the production of the future that they have envisioned in the first place. Second, the future is a site for struggling over the legitimacy of organizational activity. That is, by envisioning and referring to alternative futures, organizational actors may legitimize or delegitimize the status quo. Reflections on and debates about the future are actually a young phenomenon of modernity. In pre-modern times, before the 18th century, the future was viewed to be in the hands of God. People envisioned a clear end, a last judgment that was prefixed and beyond human control. As historians and sociologists such as Koselleck, Rosa and Hölscher showed, modernity could only begin in the 18th century because people increasingly viewed the future as a temporal category that humans can shape or even control. For example, people participated in social revolutions that were supposed to accelerate desired futures to come into being more rapidly in the present. Whereas early modern times seem to be an endless repetition of the past based on natural cycles such as the four seasons or the celestial bodies, modern times were dominated by planning practices. Through the emergence of increasingly sophisticated planning technologies, actors within and beyond organizations increasingly imagined both hopeful and daunting futures that they aimed to realize or impede in the present. At modernity's peak in the early 20th century to the 1970s, actors even aimed to discipline and control the future through the performance of planning technologies. All types of organizations adopted planning technologies, from kindergartens to public broadcasters and even entire cities. Therefore, actors seem to be certain that the future knows only one direction: forward. And the only way to thrive was to enter the future faster than others. This certainty about the future eroded in late modernity, from the 1980s. Actors and organizations became increasingly dissatisfied with the results that their use of planning technologies generated. Specifically, they noted that alternative futures continually emerged, that is, futures that they did not envision or prepare for with their planning procedures, and which usually deviate from the reproduction of the status quo. For example, debates on the digital transformation are rife with terms such as artificial intelligence, algorithms, machine learning, robots, and cyborgs, all of which promise a revolution of organizations and socio-technical environments based on bits and bytes. The same is true for contemporary debates on sustainable development. At the latest with the Fridays for Future movement, we know that such debates are intertwined with various conceptions of the future. Some of those conceptions are daunting and alarming, others are hopeful and humiliating. Some of the conceptions of the future are rather distant, with a time horizon of several decades, whereas others are near and to be reached within a short time horizon. These conceptions have in common that they bring in alternative futures. That is, these futures deviate from planning-driven future scenarios that reproduce the past. In doing so, sustainable futures create potentials for a new yet to come, one that transcends the status quo. Thus, debates on sustainable development involve a plurality of futures. For example, those that reflect the status quo in that they reproduce the past, and those that aim to overcome the status quo so as to move toward a sustainable future. In doing so, the future becomes a contested terrain in which actors legitimize and delegitimize organizational activities in the present. Such contests are infused by different ideologies, which produce competing futures. For example, we observe the right-wing denial of climate change, which supposes that the future will or should be similar to the past. A conservative center-right experience of climate change as a matter of the distant future, leaving us plenty of time for incremental responses. A center-left experience of climate change as an issue of the near future, requiring urgent action. And a left-wing experience of climate change as an actuality that requires a revolution now in order to achieve a sustainable future. Based on these ideologies, actors invoke their futures to legitimize and delegitimize organizational activities in the present. How then can sustainable development be realized? When taking the future, or rather the futures, into account, those who propose to move toward a sustainable future must win or at least gain dominance over the contest in which competing futures are negotiated so as to create a shared understanding of a sustainable future that people can jointly move toward. Evidently, at least in democratic societies, this is far from easy. In order to create a shared understanding of a sustainable future that people live in their day-to-day lives, people must be involved in the process of developing this understanding of the future. This turns people's participation and inclusion into a key concern for sustainable development. However, the plurality of futures is a manifestation of increasingly pluralistic societies in which competing interests and ideologies prevail. Therefore, simply letting people's voices be heard in a supposedly open contest in which the better argument wins will most likely not generate a shared consensus on a sustainable future. Instead, the continually contested nature of the future points to the importance of engaging in a constructive dialogue, not just as a one-off event, but as an ongoing process in which competing futures struggle over the legitimacy of organizational activities on the road toward more sustainable development.